Everybody, this is Dream, and we have a 9-game slate for college basketball today. We have a bunch of games. I've also gone ahead and done some picks for each game. So I have Virginia Tech over Boston College. I have Villanova over St. John's. I have Michigan covering the spread against UNC. It's currently around a 5-point spread. I expect that game to come down to a last-second shot and could go either way. For Clemson and Georgia Tech, I have Clemson. For Notre Dame and Florida State, I have Florida State. For Utah and TCU, I've got TCU. And also a game that I think is probably going to come down to last second shot. Then for Auburn and Washington, I have Auburn, but I do think that one's going to be close. San Francisco and Arizona State, I have San Francisco winning. And then Colorado State and USC, I have USC winning, So if you care about those things, then that's what I have there. Let's go ahead and get into the players I like for DraftKings today. We have a lot of good players playing today, and so I had to deep dive, especially for value. But there's actually quite a bit of good value, especially in the guard position, and then there's really good plays in the forward position for more expensive players. So let's go ahead and get into the players I do like today. We're going to start with Mike Miles from TCU against Utah. He's been playing really solid this season. He hasn't played a ton of games yet, but he has played in a handful of games, and he's been good in all of them. He scores well. He's not a big peripheral stat guy that much, but he does have good instincts to score, and I expect him to score well and often in this game and get a full complement of minutes, especially if it stays close, which I expect it to do. He should get around 30 to 35 minutes, and his price point is fair enough here that he's viable on the slate. He also has a .94 fantasy point per minute, which definitely gives him some upside in this matchup. Then we're going to look at P.J. Fuller for Washington. Now, he has played well versus really good opponents this season. We're actually going to look at his games here, and you see against Gonzaga, he played 34 minutes and 27 fantasy points. I feel like this is a similar position. Obviously, Auburn is a good team, and so I expect him to play well in this game. His price has actually come down quite a bit, probably because he doesn't always play a full complement of minutes, depending on how the game goes. But overall, he's got good instincts to get rebounds, some, and also, for a guard at least. And he's been getting steals and blocks in most games, and so I expect him to actually have some viable opportunity here. His price is also just too cheap for his potential, and he should be starting now. And he's only had one game all season under 15 fantasy points, and that gives him some nice cushion here to be really good today. And that game was early in the season against St. Mary, where it was a tight game, but he just didn't score much or get other fancy things and had 8 turnovers. I don't expect that issue today, and I expect him to play pretty decently and get a decent chunk of minutes. And so then we're going to look at, we're also going to look at his fantasy points per minute. He's at .69 fantasy points per minute, but overall his price is cheap enough that it doesn't matter. Brevin Galloway for Clemson, also pretty interesting today. Now, he hasn't been as consistent as P.J. Fuller, but he started all the games except for the last game this season, and an injured player for Clemson came back, so he's now coming off the bench as the sixth man. So he still has a really solid role, and his price point has come down quite a bit as a result of that. And in the last game, he played 21 minutes, and he had 21 fantasy points. I expect him to have a similar output in this game against Georgia Tech, which should stay pretty close for the most part. It's around 3 or 4 point spread, I think, in Vegas. Though the real concern here is the minutes, and so while he is a viable option, he's not my favorite option, but he does average .64 fantasy points per minute, but that should go up as he becomes the sixth man for the team. And then we're going to look at Keon Minifield for Washington. Now, he's coming off the bench, which obviously caps his minutes a little bit, but he's been playing more minutes in the last few games, and he played pretty solid in the last 2 games where he scored over 20 fantasy points. His price point is also just minimum price, and as long as he gets a decent amount of minutes, he should get some opportunity here. He didn't play a ton or even do very much against Gonzaga, but a lot of players don't, and so I don't really hold that too much against him. He is minimum priced here, so it does give him some upside. And this matchup, while it is difficult, I do think he's going to get some minutes, and he's going to have to, play more with the situation on the team. So I expect him to play, 25 to 35 minutes and get some at least peripheral points and score some buckets to make it viable for him. He's also averaging 0.71 fantasy points per minute, so this price point, getting 30 minutes, is definitely advantageous to put him in your roster. Then we're going to look at forwards. We're going to start with Armando Bacot. Now, for UNC, now he's my favorite play on the slate. He is a must-play, I think, today against Michigan. This game is going to be tight. He's going to get a ton of rebounds. He's really good at that. He's got a 1.08 fantasy points per minute. Obviously, his price point is extremely high, but he should be able to pay off here. Michigan has trouble with big guys like this, even though Hunter Dickinson is good. Even Oscar Tshiebwe for Kentucky did extremely well against Michigan, and I expect Bacot to have a similar output and be able to get 15 or so rebounds in this game. He's been rebounding extremely well. He has double potential. He can get an NBA type of game here where he scores 50 fantasy points, and I kind of expect him to do that today. Then we're going to look at Nate Lazaski for Notre Dame. He's just been playing a ton of minutes lately. He's at 0.8 fantasy points per minute, which isn't super ideal, but it's decent. And he's had some really big games this season, and he's been playing well. The only real concern here is if one way that he could really pay off is if he could get the double-double, which he's been really close in a handful of games. He's getting 7, 8, and 9 rebounds a lot. If he can get over the 10, that would definitely be nice. But his scoring really does need to improve. But his price point has dropped off quite a bit, so I think he's very viable on the slate in this matchup where he'll get plenty of minutes. Then Keon Brooks, he's another guy that I think is nearly a must-play today. Though the matchup isn't super ideal, he's actually been extremely good against Auburn in his time at Kentucky, and so I look for him to play well in this game. He's also been really good at Washington this season. He's only had one game sub 20 fantasy points all season long, and that was against Gonzaga, which is a tough matchup. And quite frankly, he's just a good player. He gets a lot of minutes, and he gets a lot of stats. He's been playing with a lot of confidence, and so as long as that continues, he does have double-double potential with rebounds occasionally, though he hasn't really been hitting that much because he's been scoring more, but he's been playing well, and I expect that to continue here. Especially if he can score around 25 real points, he should be able to pay off on this matchup extremely easily. Then we're going to look at Eric Dixon. Now, Eric Dixon for Villanova looks in a very interesting spot here at $7,200. He has been inconsistent this season, but he's getting 30 minutes per game. In this one, I think he'll get around 30 minutes with the situation, and he should be he's averaging 0.92 fantasy points per minute, which makes him viable here. This matchup is also in his favor, and so I think he's in a good spot. And I like what he's done so far this season. He's had a couple off games, but his scoring is good, and he does have rebounding potential to get double-doubles and stuff like that. And he's also getting lots of other stats as well when he plays a full complement of minutes, which he should in this matchup. And then finally, Zane Meeks for San Francisco. Now, this is an interesting matchup for him, but he's been playing really solid. He started 3 of the last 4 games, and he's played 24 minutes in the last 2 games or better. He's had one bad game in those last 4 since he's been, which he didn't start, but he started on the 7th, the 17th, and the 19th, and all 3 of those games he played 21 minutes or higher. I expect that to continue today. And he's been playing really solid, and his price point is just too cheap for the minutes he's potentially going to get here. Not only that, but it's a good matchup where it's going to be a pretty tight game, and he's played pretty good in those games. You can see that he's getting some rebounds and stuff, but he is pretty scoring dependent, so do keep that in mind, but he is viable on the slate. So with that said, guys, that's what I have for this slate. I also did a write-up, kind of giving a detail of all the players I've listed here on Patreon, so if you want to check that out, feel free to take a look at that. That's in the description below. You can pay whatever you want to check that out. And I also put the write-ups for basketball, NBA, and everything else I ever do on there. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Make sure to check out the Discord, and have a nice day, guys.